Day 1243 of the Ukrainian war map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 1,041,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,040 in the past day. Then as for hardware, 3 tanks, 9 APBs and 52 artillery, plus a further air defense system add-on from yesterday's count. And as for these daily figures, 1 out of 3 Russian losses is now attributed to Ukraine's new division of unmanned systems forces, as per the most recent June data. So as this new branch of their military grows, its influence on the battlefield is only set to increase. And also noting that although just over 30% of Russian targets destroyed are credited to the unmanned systems forces, drones of all categories across every military branch are now responsible for more than 70% of all Russian targets destroyed. And now to the map, and where Putin saw his capital under a wave of UAV strikes for a third night in a row, with the Kremlin now increasingly unable to insulate the so-called special military operation from direct impact on the nation's capital. A flock of new Ukrainian long-ranged UAVs, visually similar to Russian Shaheds, were spotted flying towards enemy airspace. Explosions and fires erupted around Moscow, forcing major airports to suspend operations. Over 130 flights were delayed or cancelled, paralyzing air travel across the country. And then following these events, moments ago, reports of strikes on the Zelenograd region of Moscow at the JSC Angstrom factory, with the enterprise widely considered a key military site, having one of the most industrious complexes in Russia for the design and manufacturing of semiconductor products, modern microcontrollers and microprocessors. Then next to Rostov, where over the weekend more than 50 trains were delayed after a drone attack. Images show the consequences at Likovsky after an overnight wave. The post building was damaged and the contact network was cut. As per local media's own assessment, they said that this is how even just a few drones can disrupt logistics in several regions for an entire day. Also from the weekend, reports came out about Russia shifting its missile launch tactics against Ukraine, now sending Tu-95 strategic bombers all the way from the Ukrainka airbase in the Far East, a staggering 6,000 kilometers from Ukraine. It's a logistical feat that very ideally requires support from Russia's limited fleet of IL-78 mid-air refueling tankers due to the round trip, for which Russia has 19 of these tankers in their fleet. But the amount of actual operational aircraft is very likely to be less than half of that, given how we've seen how their fleets operate. So these flight paths are a glimpse into how Moscow's mounting anxiety is progressing about keeping its Tu-95 bombers safe. Instead of projecting dominance, Russia is stashing its strategic assets as far from Ukrainian drones and missiles as possible, and in the least here as part of a test run, which has the outcome of placing their aircraft under additional operational strain. The irony to be found here as well is that Russia now hits Ukraine from Ukrainka, as per the name of the airbase, which literally translates to Ukrainian woman, and a name that, in its own right, conveys a distinct cultural separation between the two nations. So ultimately, when a so-called superpower starts firing at neighbors from a base that's so far away you could practically wave at Japan, something has gone very, very wrong. Now to Ukraine, where the AFU has very likely liberated all of Kindrativka in the Sumy region. In response, Russia is reinforcing its positions with the 810th Naval Infantry Brigade and the 204th Akhmat Special Purpose Regiment, which is a brigade that has suffered tremendously in this war, and a regiment that doesn't even like to get their hands dirty, with Akhmat units preferring or flat out ordering regular Russian army units in between them and the fight. Nonetheless, Russia scrambles to stabilize the front, deploying additional troops to counter Ukrainian advances near Andrivka, but once again causing the Russian MOD to grapple with the strategic dilemma of deciding where to concentrate their northern forces when they have too many actively open fronts on the wider map to contend with already. Then headed further into the map, where activity remains most fierce in the southeast, with Russian forces marginal advancement near Pidubne, as Russia looks to consolidate the remainder of the most southeastern pocket up to the Donetsk border lines right here, which is about 300 to 500 square kilometers of work cut out for them. Meanwhile, and further up on the map, thousands of square kilometers of increasingly fortified Ukrainian territory still needs to be secured by the armed forces of Russia to the tune of about 5,000 square kilometers. Then next for this region, happening on the weekend or just prior, Ukrainian Defense Intelligence Unit Primary continued its relentless campaign against Russian air defenses as recent drone strikes targeted key assets including 3 Podlyot radar stations, 2 Niobe SV radar stations, 2 S-300V missile launchers, plus 1 P-18 radar station. It's called Suppression of Enemy Air Defenses, or SEAD, some prefer SEAD, and is some of the most important and most debilitating strikes you'll see on the map. And now to Pokrovsk, but from a different angle, or should I say a different camera angle, because a 22-year-old woman, daughter of a Moscow patriarchate priest, was sentenced in Ukraine to 15 years for espionage after she installed a surveillance camera under a Russian Orthodox church dome in a Ukrainian-held location near Pokrovsk, tracking military movements for Russia's FSB. The case is far from unique. Prosecutions for similar church-based spying have surfaced elsewhere in Europe, including Sweden, Bulgaria, Poland, and previously in Ukraine, for an activity that is an incredibly illegal maneuver and an incredibly sensitive location as well. Now, it should be noted that the Russian Orthodox Church stands less as a spiritual sanctuary and more like a well-connected arm of the Kremlin, closely tied to the FSB, staffed by figures once embedded in Soviet intelligence, with, for instance, the head of the Russian Mafia Church with his infamous €50,000 Swiss Breguet watch, photoshopped out of an official photo only to linger in reflections. Not exactly the humble moral compass this Russian Eastern Orthodox Church purports to be. Then next to the south, where a small sabotage and reconnaissance unit from fighters of the anti-Kremlin Freedom of Russia Legion unit pulled off a sharp ambush against the Russian National Guard's Akhmet unit near Velika Bilozerka, progressing astonishingly deep, about 20 kilometers or 12 miles deep into enemy territory before striking, catching Akhmet fighters by surprise with a precise blast that took out that enemy unit. The operation not only hit its mark, but the Legion also gathered intel on Russian logistics, equipment, and command posts, handing Ukraine a fresh tactical edge for the region. Such a reconnaissance depth is rare, but possible due to the group's familiarity with the Russian tactics, possibly from defectors, and real-time Ukrainian intelligence that helped them evade detection, strike quickly, and retreat safely. Then to more reporting from around the map, and where the Ukrainian military from the illustrious 412th Regiment of the Unmanned Systems Forces, Nemesis, destroyed a Russian T-72 tank, instant turret detachment. Also seen on the map, but unrelated, a damaged Russian T-72 tank destroyed, or near enough to it, but is different to the first, given that there's an existing turret-centric fire to be found here. Also seen on the map, the aftermath wreckage of a Ukrainian R-360 Neptune missile after a strike on a Russian ground target. This find possibly comes from Rostov in Russia, where Russians found the wreckage and identified the domestically produced Ukrainian missile, likely turning it into an event that puts Russian paranoia about Neptune missiles into full swing, if it wasn't already a much vocalized concern by the Russian military. Also on the map, explosions of Russian Garan-2 drones, with this one recorded next to a Ukrainian Yak-52 aircraft that works as an interceptor. Then headed across to some news, and we're in a diplomatic shuffle and latest strategic move to bolster Ukraine's air defenses. The US has prioritized caused Germany's transfer of Patriot systems, specifically letting Berlin move ahead of Switzerland in the line of countries waiting for the US-produced Patriot deliveries. This expedited decision means that Germany is able to send 2 Patriot batteries to Kyiv soon, and otherwise before the US fulfills commitments to Switzerland on this front. No delivery date is specified for this latest news, but it is expected to be soon, and where we usually become aware of the deliveries after they've occurred for operational security reasons. Next to cyber warfare news, as Ukrainian hackers reportedly breached Gazprom's entire digital infrastructure of the Russian energy giant, gaining deep access before deploying custom tools to erase servers and backups. Over 390 subsidiaries, along with SCADA and GIS control systems that manage gas flows and oil pressure, were wiped. Add to that critical database information for financials, contracts, legal documents, and many thousands of user credentials were wiped, which goes a very long way to crippling core operations. The attack threatens Gazprom's contract payment system and supply networks, risking defaults and bank instability. Ukrainian operatives are said to have exfiltrated hundreds of terabytes of sensitive data before the coordinated wipe, leaving Russia's state gas monopoly digitally paralyzed. Now to some hardware news, courtesy of the Thunder from Down Under, as Australia's shipment of M1A1 Abrams main battle tanks have officially landed, with the first tranche already delivered to Ukraine and the final deliveries expected soon. These heavily armored tanks combine 120mm smoothbore firepower, advanced control systems, and updated thermal sights for vastly better target acquisition and engagement range. In fact, some of these Abrams tank deliveries come with fire target locator gear, able to mark threats for Ukrainian artillery up to 8 kilometers away. So these aren't just symbolic hand-me-downs, they're a real precision-focused addition, multiplying Ukraine's offensive punch where it counts most. So that has to be it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers! Penetrating deep into Russia's rear. Okay, that just doesn't quite sound right.